My name is Elizabeth, I'm a medical student and an artist living in London, and in this video I wanted to share my top tips for lecture note-taking in university. Chances are we won't attend every single lecture in university, but when we do, these are the things that I've found to be helpful for me. The first thing, and this is kind of a mind shift change, was realizing the difference between a lecture and Wikipedia. The way that I see lectures now is that they don't only have value in the content that is delivered and the information, but there's a lot of value in the lecturer as an individual in himself. This is because chances are they are a professional, someone who has a lot of insight and experience in what they are talking about. So the way that they phrase things, the connections that they make, the things that they emphasize are actually the most valuable thing for me in the lecture. What I mean by this specifically is that if I see a lecturer focusing on something for quite a long time, or explicitly saying that this is very important, this comes up all the time, I really want to focus on whenever they say things like this. I will make a symbol. For me, that's a star on the top right-hand corner of my lecture notes, but you can really use anything. So I'll just make a symbol to tell myself later that this is something important to know. Some lectures might have 70 or 80 slides, and it is completely impossible for me to retain all the information that I will be delivered year on year in medicine. But whenever someone who's been teaching this for many times explicitly says this is important, my ears perk up and I make a symbol in my notes. Another thing that I find important in what a lecturer says is when they summarize things. And summaries don't only happen in the end of the lecture, although that is very important too, but after they finish describing a concept, especially something that is quite long and complicated, they usually give a one-sentence brief summary. These are the most important parts of the lecture to me. I will usually write or type these out every time and pay a lot of attention to them. In the end of the day, I can just collect these summaries and I'll have the main points of what I need to know in the lecture. What they might also add are real-life examples or connections that are not mentioned in the slide. So when they say things like, the thing that I mentioned a few weeks ago, or this is similar to the condition that we had before, or when they describe a medication, for example, they might say, oh, we've seen this used previously for Y, but now we're using it for Z. I'll note these little connections because they're very important in consolidating information in my mind. My next point would be to find the sweet spot. There's this point in between too much and too little note-taking that depends on the individual, but is valuable to know. For me, for example, if I take too many notes, it basically becomes a transcription of what the lecturer is saying, and I'll end up with 4 pages of lecture notes that I'm probably never going to read again and were a complete waste of time. On the other hand, if I'm not taking any notes at all, I am very likely to fall asleep. So there's this point in the middle that is quite valuable, using things such as handwriting, although I do have my poems for this too, but I would definitely recommend trying to train yourself to find what is the amount that you realistically would actually read when you are revising. My third point is to only take notes of things that are not in the slides. For things that are there already, circle it or highlight it or star it or explain it if you don't understand. And my last point, and this is so important, is to actually ask questions to your lecturer once it is over. In my first year, I realized later on that I was known as that really weird girl who would ask lecturers questions after every single one, and I genuinely would do this. I'm not shy when it comes to asking questions and looking stupid. It's absolutely fine. I do it unintentionally enough that doing it intentionally too sometimes is okay. So I would do after every lecture is get yourself some questions to ask the person who just explained things to you. There are multiple benefits to this. Firstly, some things, especially in medicine, would take honestly half an hour of Googling and going down studies to find a non-straightforward answer to something, when I could just ask my lecturer and get an explanation in a few seconds because they are always on top of that research anyway. The second thing is that they likely already understand what they're explaining very well, so they can give very basic explanations. They might get carried away in a lecture and make things a bit too complicated, but if you ask them, seriously, I don't understand this. Are you saying this leads to this, leads to that, or am I being stupid? And they will say, oh, no. What I meant was, and they will explain it very simply, and suddenly things will just click in place and you have your answer. You can also ask them how important things are. How often do we see this condition in patients? If they were to pick only one, which one would they study? What tips do they have for memorizing these things? If they've learned what they're explaining to you, they've struggled through understanding it too. So they already have tips that are there to give. In this way, in the end of almost every lecture, I left knowing exactly what was going on. I still had a lot of memorizing and understanding to do, but especially when things go completely over my head in a lecture, I will make sure to approach that lecturer and ask them to clarify at least some of it so I know where to start. So those are my top tips for lecture note taking. It might be that you are using all of these methods already. I'm also curious to know what methods and tricks you use for lecture note taking. It would definitely help me a lot, and if there's anyone else watching this, perhaps them too. I'm thinking of potentially making a series on how I take notes with my iPad, on Notion, and with different things. So if this is something that you're interested in too, please let me know. As always, if you made it so far, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Be kind to yourself and others, and don't believe everything you think. Thanks. Bye.